My name is Kira Valdez, and picture this. It's 9:30 in the morning. I'm in the conference room, and our HR director Pamela just announced that bonuses are canceled this year because of budget constraints. I glance at my coworkers' faces, seeing their disappointment, while I remember I just landed 6 major contracts worth over $2 million in revenue, and they're telling me there's no money for bonuses. 3 days later, I walked past the executive conference room and saw catering being set up for their quarterly retreat. Salmon, fancy desserts, the works. And noticed architectural plans for renovating the executive floor, with new furniture, marble countertops, and even a meditation room. That's when I realized they weren't broke. They just didn't think I deserved anything. At 26, working for this massive consulting firm, my job was bringing in new clients, and I was ridiculously good. So good it was scary. But the executives treated me like I was lucky just to be there. Thornton Webb, the CEO, looked right through you like you didn't matter. CFO Gwendolyn Parks forced me to repeat myself constantly and couldn't handle being wrong about financial projections. And VP of Sales. Cordelia Nash interrupted me mid-sentence to suggest traditional approaches, while taking credit for other people's ideas and bragging about her client connections. When bonuses were canceled, I didn't argue or complain. I smiled and started planning. I watched them closely, noting their habits, fears, and weaknesses. Thornton lied to cover his incompetence. Gwendolyn obsessed over being right, and Cordelia clawed to appear irreplaceable. These people had made a huge mistake. They had no idea who I was, and I was ready to make them pay for every month they forced me to wait. But here's what I started to notice. Those client relationships were mostly her making a courtesy call every few months just to check in. She wasn't actually bringing in new business anymore. For 8 months, I watched them, learning their schedules, their insecurities, their pressure points. I picked up on things like how Thornton would visibly panic when board members asked technical questions during presentations, how Gwendolyn would immediately second-guess herself if anyone challenged her projections with industry data, and how Cordelia would grow defensive the moment someone hinted that her role might not be essential. And while I was learning all of this, I kept doing my job, bringing in clients, beating targets, being the perfect employee who never complained. But I was also doing something else. I was positioning myself. Our company had an annual board presentation every September, the biggest moment of the year, when board members flew in from across the country and executives presented yearly performance, future projections, and strategic initiatives to prove they deserved their roles for another year, and I realized that was my opening. Months in advance, I began reaching out to board members indirectly, making sure I was included in client meetings during their visits, sending detailed reports that occasionally got forwarded to them, and volunteering to help with presentation research, which gave me access to exactly what the executives planned to show and what they planned to hide. By July, I had a clear picture of what September would look like. Thornton would present growth numbers he didn't actually understand. Gwendolyn would project conservative forecasts, far below industry standards, and Cordelia would take credit for retention numbers driven by customer service changes she'd opposed. That's when I started planting seeds, having casual conversations with major clients about industry trends, new approaches to corporate training, and data from other companies, not telling them anything outright, just making them curious about questions our executives couldn't answer. I dug deep into competitor research, real performance numbers, new initiatives, success rates, details that would make our projections look completely out of touch. And I made sure board members knew I was behind this work, not by showing off, but by being useful. When they asked questions, I had answers. When they wondered about trends, I quietly sent articles. I became their go-to source for real information. By August, I could see it working as board members started asking sharper questions during executive calls about technical details, industry comparisons, and forward-looking strategy, and the executives began to sweat. Thornton stayed late trying to learn what he should have known all along. Gwendolyn kept asking for more data to defend her numbers, and Cordelia suddenly forced her way into client meetings she'd never cared about before, all of them thinking the board was just being tougher this year. Meanwhile, I prepared for September like it was the most important performance of my life. Because it was. I had spent 8 months studying them like lab specimens, knowing exactly what would make them panic, exactly what would expose their weaknesses, and exactly how to make sure I was standing there when everything collapsed, ready to fix what they couldn't. The week before the September presentation, the tension in the office was impossible to ignore. Thornton was snapping at people over the smallest mistakes. Gwendolyn was working through lunch every day, obsessively double and triple checking her numbers. Cordelia was sending emails at all hours, scrambling to gather last-minute client testimonials to bolster her presentation. And I was calm, completely, utterly calm, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that in just 72 hours, their careers were about to implode, and there would be nothing they could do to stop it. Not because I planned to sabotage them, but because I was letting them sabotage themselves. The board presentation was set for Thursday at 10 a.m., and by Friday, the entire executive structure of our company would be unrecognizable. By Monday morning, I would walk in as the new regional director, with a salary triple what I'd been making, plus the bonus they refused me, plus a year-end profit-sharing deal that would set me up for life. None of them saw it coming, not even a hint. Thursday morning arrived like Christmas morning for me. I got to the office early, professional but not overdone, and took a seat at the back of the boardroom where I could watch everything unfold. Board members filed in at 9:30, 7 people controlling the company's future, and I had spent months making sure they trusted my judgment more than the executives. Thornton kicked off on time, looking confident with his fake smile, giving the usual performance overview. Then Patricia Hoffman raised her hand. Thornton, before we go further, I'm curious about the technical methodology behind our top-performing client programs. Can you walk us through the frameworks generating these results? Throat clearing. Thornton had no clue because he'd never learned them. He rambled about innovative approaches and synergistic solutions, which meant nothing. Patricia pressed, I'm sorry, could you specify which assessment tools we're implementing and how they compare to industry standards? Perfect. Patricia had asked me this exact question 2 weeks prior, and I'd given her the full breakdown with competitive data. She knew I had it covered. Thornton was drowning. David Chen jumped in. Actually, I'd like to understand those operational details. They seem crucial for evaluating sustainability. Another question I had subtly prepped him for weeks earlier. Thornton floundered, stammering about bringing in experts, looking completely incompetent in front of people who needed to trust he was in control. That's when Gwendolyn tried to save him. Big mistake. She launched into her conservative projections, nervously projecting steady growth and caution. Board member Michael Torres asked, These projections seem conservative compared to industry benchmarks. Are we leaving money on the table? Perfect again. Michael had asked me last month, and I'd provided comprehensive data showing our competitors were growing far faster. Patricia chimed in, If competitors are achieving 15 to 20% growth and we're projecting 8%, aren't we planning to fall behind? I had given her those numbers 3 weeks ago. And just like that, Thornton, Gwendolyn, and Cordelia were unraveling exactly as I had planned. Gwendolyn's face went pale. She knew Patricia was right, but admitting it meant admitting her projections were flawed. Well, those numbers can be misleading depending on how you calculate them, she stammered. Actually, David interjected, I have data showing most firms in our sector are projecting double-digit growth. Are we missing opportunities our competitors are seizing? Gwendolyn began backtracking, trying to justify her numbers, but she sounded defensive and unprepared, and the board members exchanged glances, clearly questioning why their CFO didn't grasp basic industry trends. Then Cordelia made her fatal move, attempting to rescue the situation. If I may, I think what's missing here is the strength of our client relationships. My team has maintained exceptional retention rates, and I've personally managed top-tier clients for years. Board member Jennifer Walsh leaned forward. That's great, Cordelia. Can you tell us about your recent interactions with those clients? What feedback are they giving about future needs? Perfect. Jennifer had asked me this exact question 2 months earlier, and I'd already supplied detailed insights from regular conversations with major clients, something Cordelia hadn't done in months. She started talking about general satisfaction and positive relationships, but couldn't provide specifics. Michael pressed, "How often are you actually speaking with decision makers?" Cordelia's voice tightened. "I oversee the strategic aspects of these relationships, but not the operational side," she admitted when Patricia probed further. "So when clients have specific needs or concerns, they're not coming to you directly." It was unraveling beautifully. Thornton didn't understand the technical work, Gwendolyn misread the market, and Cordelia wasn't managing clients at all. Then David asked the question that destroyed them. If our CEO doesn't grasp methodologies, our CFO underestimates growth, and our VP of sales isn't managing key clients, who is actually running the strategic aspects of this company? The room went silent. I watched all three executives glance at each other, realizing they'd been completely exposed. Thornton panicked and made the worst decision of his career, trying to shift blame. "David, I think this is a breakdown in communication between departments. My team has been handling strategic initiatives that maybe weren't coordinated properly with finance and sales." Gwendolyn's mouth dropped. "Excuse me? My projections are based on information from your office." Cordelia jumped in. "Perhaps if strategic initiatives were communicated better, sales could manage client relationships more effectively." And just like that, they began arguing in front of the board, pointing fingers and contradicting one another, showing they had no clue what anyone else was doing. Jennifer looked at me. "Kira, you've been quiet. You work closely with all these departments. What's your perspective on strategic coordination?" My moment. 8 months of preparation led to this exact question. I stood calmly. What we're seeing is the difference between high-level oversight and operational knowledge. Our programs perform exceptionally well, but the metrics and client feedback we receive daily don't always flow up through traditional reporting channels. I pulled out my tablet. Our technical methodologies are more advanced than competitors, but complex and hands-on. Financially, we could support more aggressive growth projections if we track the right metrics and understand market opportunities. And our client relationships are stronger than ever, because we've shifted to frequent, substantive interactions beyond standard account management. The board members nodded. Finally, someone was giving clear, confident answers. "Can you elaborate on those market opportunities?" Michael asked. For the next 20 minutes, I guided them through everything: real technical explanations of our methodologies, detailed market analysis highlighting growth potential, and specific client feedback about emerging needs, all information I'd been gathering for months, while the executives focused on presentations and office politics. By the time I finished, the contrast was clear. The executives looked confused and defensive, while I appeared prepared and confident. Patricia asked the question that sealed their fate. "Kira, in your opinion, what would need to change for us to reach our full potential as a company?" Calmly, I replied, "We need leadership that understands operations, financial planning that reflects market realities, and client management focused on ongoing value rather than periodic check-ins. The talent and systems are here. We just need strategic direction based on actual knowledge, not assumptions." David nodded slowly. "Very insightful. Thank you." The meeting ended with the board requesting private time to discuss their findings. The executives filed out, looking like they'd been hit by a truck. Over the next 2 weeks, everything unfolded exactly as I planned. Thornton couldn't answer basic operational questions, Gwendolyn couldn't defend her projections when challenged with real data, and Cordelia couldn't prove her strategic value to client relationships. Meanwhile, I continued excelling at my job, providing board members with insights and demonstrating full mastery of the business. On the last Friday of September, Thornton was given a choice: resign or face a no-confidence vote. He resigned. Gwendolyn accepted early retirement, and Cordelia transferred to a subsidiary without strategic responsibilities. On Monday, October 1st, I walked in as the new Regional Director of Strategic Development, with a salary triple what I'd earned, the bonus I'd been denied plus back pay for 8 months, and a profit-sharing agreement for all new revenue I generated. And the most beautiful part? They never realized what had happened. They assumed the board had simply become more demanding, that market pressures exposed their weaknesses, that timing was against them. They had no idea that for 8 months I had systematically studied their insecurities and created circumstances where those insecurities would destroy them. The company is thriving now: 22% annual growth, rising client satisfaction, increasing revenue, and every month when my profit-sharing check arrives, I remember that morning in September when they told me there was no money for bonuses. People often ask how I went from being dismissed to being in charge in under a year. The answer is simple. I observed, I learned, and I waited for the right moment to reveal who I really was. They thought they could treat me like I didn't matter, but instead, they taught me how to make sure I was the only one who did. So if you're in a situation where you're underestimated, where your contributions are ignored, remember this story. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting everything. If this story inspired you, hit like, comment with the moment that hit you hardest, and share it with someone who needs to know that patience, preparation, and attention to detail can be your most powerful weapons.